my name is Paul. My name is Paul Frankel, and I'm a librarian here at Madison Regional Library. I want to welcome you guys to our panel tonight titled Local News, the Evolving Landscape of Journalism in Harrisonburg and Rockingham County. On behalf of MRL, I do want to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Virginia Center for the book in partnership with the Pulitzer Prizes for their generous support, which made this program possible. I want to also thank the James Madison Center for Civic Engagement for partnering with us on this program. This panel discussion will be recorded and it will be available for viewing afterwards on MRL's YouTube channel. Please, for attendees, hold off on your questions for the panelists until the attendee Q&A section of the program. If you are interested in asking questions during that part of the program, you can use the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the program, I will be typing out the questions that are asked of our panelists in the chat box for everyone to see. And after the program is over, I will be emailing all of the attendees a post-event survey that I would love for all of you to fill out. After the program, your response will be helpful for MRL to create better online programming. I'll be honest, this is actually for the adult team here at the library. This is our first adult program to Zoom, so any feedback would be really helpful. And it also would help us fulfill our obligation for our grant, which was provided again by the Virginia Center of the book. Thank you for being willing to fill out that survey afterwards. Now to introduce our panelists. We have Jim Sacco, who is the editor of the Daily News Record. We have Bridget Manley, who is a partner with The Citizen. Next is Isabella Marcelino, who is a producer with WHSV TV3. And then lastly, we have Bob Levicki, who is the news director at WMRA. Our moderator today is Lori Britt, who is an associate professor in James Madison University School of Communication Studies. I want to thank you guys all for being part of this panel. That's good. I really appreciate everyone being here. Now I'm going to actually put myself in the background so you're not going to see me anymore or hear me at all. I'm going to kind of handle things on the background and hand this over to our wonderful moderator, Lori.
Thank you so much, Paul. Glad to be here and talk about this really important topic with our panelists. So we just heard people's names, and in case you need to know more, I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn to tell us a little bit more about their media outlet and its history in our community, because we're really looking at the landscape of journalism. So we're going to start out with Jim and then go to Isabel, Bridget, and Bob. So Jim, go right ahead.
Well, the Daily News Record is your typical legacy journalism. It is a newspaper. It's been in the Shenandoah Valley for over 100 years. Or each one of its predecessors have been. I believe the first edition was done under the Evening News masthead, if I'm not mistaken, and that was May 8th, 1899. Things have obviously changed. Now we're just the Daily News Record under one entity. We used to be owned by the Bird family. We are now owned by Ogden Newspapers, Inc. That sale went through, I believe, in 2017, 2018. And I've been managing editor since September 2019.
Great. Thanks, Jim. All right, Isabella, tell us a little bit about WHSV.
Hi, yeah, so WHSV has been probably in the Valley for a pretty good amount of time, probably about 60 some years. There's been a lot of different anchors coming through. I'm sure a lot of you know some of them that have been here, that seems like for ages. Cough, cough, Bob Corso. So he's been here for ages. We all love him. WHSV is owned by Gray Television. We've been owned by them for a while. And yeah, we have a bunch of different shows throughout the day. We have our daybreak show, our noon show, our 5, our 6, and then our 10 or 11. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Isabella. And a fairly newcomer to the scene, Bridget Manley with The Citizen.
Yeah, we're the new kids in town. We have been around since fall of 2018, so we're turning 2 years old, and we're going to have the terrible twos this year. I'm really excited about it. So we have 3 publishers. We have about a dozen contributors. We are all online, so we are Harrisonburg's first all online newspaper, and we like to just think of ourselves as really hyper local news. We like to think of it as sort of a magazine that's been ripped apart, and each in-depth story runs each day. So that's a little bit about us.
Great, thanks so much. And Bob Levicki, tell us a little bit about your media outlet.
Okay, WMRA is a NPR member station. We have about 55,000 weekly listeners, and we actually cover, I was counting up the number of counties that we cover in Virginia. It's about 28 counties, all or pieces of those counties. So the Shenandoah Valley, Central Virginia, Southside Virginia, about 5,000 contributing members to WMRA, and that's how we get our funding. And we pay NPR for our programs. We're on 24 hours a day on the old-fashioned way on the radio, but of course we're online at WMRA.org, and we have a WMRA app. And so there's all kinds of different ways that people can listen to us. And WMRA has been in Harrisonburg. By the way, we're licensed through JMU. And we've been around for about 45 years. About 11 years ago, we switched over from our previous format, which was classical music, to a news talk format. So now during the day and most of the night, we carry NPR shows such as On Point and The Takeaway and Fresh Air, and then the BBC News overnight. I wear two hats there. I'm the news director. I'm also the morning edition host.
Great. So that's kind of the landscape of where we all are. So now we're going to dig into some of our other questions that are really looking broadly. So I'm going to give each panelist a chance to ask, what do you see from your perspective as the two greatest challenges to providing high quality news content in a local market? And we're going to start with Isabella.
I think one of the biggest things is, I don't want to say people don't trust us, but it's hard when there's a million different news sources out there and people don't know which one to pick from. So, you know, whether it be national, whether it be local, they really just don't know where to go. So our biggest thing is really just trying to bring you the truth, bringing you all the facts that we know so that you can kind of find that truth. We all know that people have their own opinions, and we're not here to give you that opinion. We're here to give you the facts. You can make your own opinion. So that's probably one of the biggest things.
Okay. And then you've already kind of addressed the second part of the question there, is how is your organization trying to creatively address those challenges? So is there anything beyond kind of how you bring people the truth?
Sure. Social media is, I mean, we've all seen it completely blow up. And we have so many different platforms on social media that we try to get everyone to follow. You know, we all go on our phones each morning, each night, literally all throughout the day, and we're seeing all these different kinds of news. So if you follow us, or if you follow any kind of local news, you're kind of seeing a different aspect to news in a way that it's different than national. So social media definitely has been one of our biggest platforms to do that.
Great, thanks. Bridget, what about that same question for you? What are the challenges to providing high quality content, and how are you creatively addressing that?
Such a great question. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing across the nation is the local journalism business model, right? It's totally upended. It's changing completely. For us, that means revenue. It is hard to try and convince people to pay for something that feels so readily available and everywhere. And so that has been one of the challenges for us. So, you know, we've been sort of doing some unique and new ways. We, of course, offer the advertising on the website, but we also take donor contributions. So one of the creative ways that we're just now starting is sort of pointing out exactly what your money is buying. So we keep our costs really low, and we are all online. And so all of that money goes towards the reporting. So one of the creative ways that we've been sort of trying to get people to engage and make it incentivized is to say, okay, this amount of money is going to pay for this city council meeting. This amount of money is going to pay for a series on homelessness in Harrisonburg. So that's one of the creative ways we're sort of tackling that challenge. I think the other challenge is really to, again, this is sort of on a national level, to get people to invest their time as well in fact-based, objective reporting as a tool to then engage with their community and better understand their community. And so I think that's like a national problem, but here in Harrisonburg, we're really lucky, right? Because Harrisonburg is pretty great at being civically engaged. And so just building that base of core readers who are impassioned for that fair and journalistic reporting is really important to us. And so just building on that is what we're working on.
Great, thanks, Bridget. Bob, what would you say to that same question? What are the challenges?
I would probably have a similar answer. Of course, for us, revenue, money is the biggest limitation that we have. And unlike you all, we don't have a news department where we're covering the local community every single day in the way that, say, the DNR does, or the Citizen does, or WHSV does. We're much more limited in our resources in terms of the news. So most of the money that we have at WMRA goes to paying for NPR programs. And then we have a separate, it's called a news and information fund that we use to pay freelance journalists, such as Bridget. Bridget actually does some work for us and does a really excellent job. But we cover such a large area that we can't possibly cover Harrisonburg and Lexington and Winchester and Charlottesville in the way that the local media that are so important in those individual cities cover. So it's the money to do the stories that we do and do the kind of coverage that we do and the newscasts, but it's also the huge area that we cover. And I want to say something about the pandemic too. What we've noticed with, and this is public radio stations and probably commercial media across the country, because people are, many people are not driving into work like they used to. They're staying at home to work. Drive time for radio is much different now. And we're in the middle of a fund drive right now, and we're finding out that people aren't tuning in at 6 o'clock in the morning like they used to, because they're up and they're getting ready and they're in their car and listening and on the way to work. They're still at home. And maybe they're even asleep. So, we're finding out with our fundraiser this week that people are tuning in a little later, around 7 o'clock, and they're giving. And we're getting a great response this week, and it's wonderful during our fall fund drive. But that's something that we're having to deal with too, is those shifting listening patterns, and we're trying to adjust to that too. And that's another challenge.
Great, hadn't even thought of that. Had not even thought of that, yeah. Jim.
We're listening on Alexa, so just so you know, we're all listening there.
Smart speaker.
Yep. Yeah. Jim, what about your perspective on that question about the challenges?
I mean, for me and the DNR, and I just run a newsroom. I don't know anything about the money. I don't, I can't even balance my own checkbook. I couldn't imagine balancing a newspaper's checkbook. For us, it's knowing our audience, because we're kind of stuck in that middle. We have the legacy audience that have been reading the Daily News Record for 30, 40, 50 years that get it delivered to their home every day. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is people that only get it online. So the challenge for us is kind of finding that balance. And and I'm sure people have noticed, the newspaper has been shrinking, as the newspapers all over the country are. So I'm losing a little bit of that national local balance in print, but I'm fine with that, because we need to be all local. And this goes back to what Bridget said about the hyper-local aspect of it. That's across the board. I mean, when I took over as sports editor in 2016, it was my goal to make sure there wasn't a word of Associated Press in that sports section. And, I dealt with the phone calls. I'm sorry, you can't get your Nationals. You can't get your Washington football team today, because you're going to get Spotswood High School. You're going to get JMU. You're going to get Bridgewater. You're going to get Harrisonburg. And then I got to flip that over to news. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge here, is getting people to realize that I have to give people a product they can get nowhere else in the world. I mean, in Harrisburg, we're lucky. There's 4 or 5 different places that cover Harrisburg and Rockingham County. So I have to be part of those 4 or 5 that just cover that 1 or 2 areas of the country that you can't get anywhere else. If they're looking for national news that, maybe isn't super huge and doesn't affect them as much, I could tell them 30, 40 other places off the top of my head they can get that, but I can only tell them 3 or 4 places I know they can get news about Harrisburg and Rockingham County. And that's the struggle. And I think a lot of people just don't understand that. The second challenge, and this goes hand in hand with that, is trying to get away from, being labeled as the media. How do we do that? I tell people the Daily News Record doesn't write a word. We do not type a single word about what's happening in Washington, D.C. or what's happening at the national level. You want to call and call me out for being biased or unbiased on a local story, go ahead. I'll tell you you're wrong. We're very unbiased on our local reporting. If you want to call and tell me how we were biased in a national news story, I'll tell you, no, you're wrong. We were not biased. We don't write national news. The Associated Press to me is filler. And in a perfect world, that newspaper would just be nothing but local bylines, local briefs, your one-stop shop for everything that you need to know for Harrisonburg and Rockingham County. And I'm hoping we get to that point. The challenge is selling everyone else on that, selling the readers on that you want national news, go turn on, your 24-hour cable news network, get it screamed at you all you want, but you're not going to get that in the DNR.
Okay. Some great perspectives there, some things I haven't thought of. So our second question, I want to think a little bit more broadly. I mean, we're seeing a lot of shifts in our world, particularly with democracy. And some people say it's in peril, and some people say we're really losing a lot of the democratic structures. So what do you think the role of the news media is in supporting democracy? Let's start with Bridget.
Okay, I love it. I love this question. Information is power, right? Without a healthy news media covering the city council meetings and the school board meetings and the local elections and, being able to wake up in the morning and listen to a story on the radio about what your city council did, being able to read about what your school board did the night before, it encourages civic engagement. And there are all of these studies that have shown that when there are news deserts or when, the paper left towns, civic engagement goes down. And there are other studies with links to, voter turnout being lower in places where there isn't news coverage. To be able to understand what the people are doing that you voted into power, what they're doing with your money, what they're doing with that power is really important to having an engaged citizenry. So that, in my opinion, is one of the core reasons to be a journalist and one of the utmost responsibilities of any journalist outfit.
Excellent. Thanks, Bridget. And we're going to see the panelist order in your chat, just so you know. So Bob, take it away from there.
I don't know how I could follow up. That's a great answer, Bridget. I would agree 100%. A free media, news media that is trusted is central to our democracy. And, it is a big problem in this country that so many local media outlets are suffering, are closing down, are not able to be there. And that's why I'm so grateful that in Harrisonburg we have a local daily newspaper. We also have the online source, the Harrisonburg Citizen. We have WHSV, and we have public radio. There are a lot of communities around the country that don't have some or all of those resources. And Bridget's right, in those places, there's less civic engagement, there's less knowledge. And, somebody brought this up before, we can all go online and we can get news from around the world and we can listen on our phones. As we're seeing, the problem is trusted media sources. And there are still a lot of legacy resources out there that I always tell people, read a newspaper like the Washington Post, listen to NPR. These are things that have been around for a very long time. And so, the challenge is those resources that are on social media, Facebook and Twitter, that are very fun, and they give us that little boost of oxytocin or whatever it is and the clickbait. But it takes more time to pay attention to real news sources and to find those sometimes. I think a lot of people don't know where they are. And so they just pick up their phones and find the easiest thing that they can.
Right. Right. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we all got to follow Bridget's answer. Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks.
That's why recycling.
But I mean, but to piggyback off what she said, she's so right. I mean, it's and I'm sorry, I grew up in Chicago's Little Italy. I talk with my hands way too much. I get it, but I mean, you know, to have that knowledge is to have that power to know that anyone that works in City Hall gets paid, but with your tax dollars. They should have to answer for things that happen in City Hall. Anyone that works in the Rockingham County, you know, administration building, if you live in Rockingham County, your tax dollars pays for them. You know, you need to know, they need to be held accountable. You need to know what's going on in those walls. And while, you know, we've made this concerted effort to kind of get outside those brick and mortar walls that I think a lot of journalists were most comfortable sitting in and getting out, you know, among, you know, to go out there on the streets and find these stories. I think still, we all still kind of revert back knowing that, okay, who needs to be held accountable isn't necessarily outside walking the streets. Who needs to be held accountable for what they're doing are these people in these brick walls. And I think, you know, that is, you know, and the other thing, I think newspapers have no part in this anymore, and it's not going to happen on my watch. And I always said when I took over a newsroom, it wouldn't happen. But the endorsing of candidates, you'll never see a newsroom that I'm in charge of endorsing a candidate. Our job as a newspaper and as a journalist, in my opinion, is to give you the information so you can make the informed choices, not to tell you who to vote for in an editorial page.
Isabella.
Sure. I mean, I think kind of piggybacking off everyone else. I mean, the pandemic really has changed everything. It's changed the way everyone has looked at the media. It's changed the way we've all picked up our phones and found an article to read through. You know, I also get to report. I get to do it once a week. And while it's not hard news, it is a tell me something good segment. So I'm getting to go out there and find those good news. And when I'm out there, a lot of people are always saying, you know, thank you for what local media is doing. There's some people that aren't. There's some people that, you know, don't want to say nice things. And that's okay if you want to have your opinion. But there's some people out there that are really, really, really supportive of local media. And honestly, that's just the thing that I think I'll speak for all of us that keeps us all just going, is knowing that local media is out there. And like I said, the pandemic really just has changed everything, changed the way that we report, and in for the better, I think. So that's kind of just piggybacking off of everybody else.
Great. So a little bit following that, so you already alluded to this in many of your answers, but one of the important roles that media plays is, with regards to government, is to provide the community with information it needs to more fully participate in local politics, because we want people participating. So tell me specifically ways that your outlet tries to support that goal, and what kinds of relationships you have to cultivate in the community to advance that goal. Sure. And this time we'll start with Bob.
Well, I'm not sure I can give a real good answer to that, because we're limited in the local coverage that we can do. But it is important to establish relationships with as many people as you possibly can in the community. What we try to cover as much as we can, because we can't do a lot of hard news. We do a lot of feature stories are more soft features. And so we do connect with a lot of just regular people out in the community. We're not covering city council. But we are talking to people around the community. This week, we actually had a 3-part series from 2 of our freelance reporters about the Black Lives Matter protests that occurred in Broadway and Elkton over the summer, and concerns of some of the protesters about the militias that were present there, and concerns that they may have been trying to work with the police, or the police working with them. And so, you know, those are things that take time and resources, and it gets back to money. And yeah, that's, it's so important to just have that connection with the community and do as much locally as we can. One of the problems that I have is I don't have any freelance reporters in Charlottesville. So even though we have a transmitter in Charlottesville and people are listening, I don't have anybody there to actually cover Charlottesville, and that's one of our weaknesses.
Right. Okay. Great, Bob. And I'm glad you kind of went that way in your question, because I think one of the things that you do in terms of getting people involved is you tend to pick and choose and highlight for those series that your station does so well, issues that you think that the local people need to know more about, that are impacting our community. So even though you're not covering everything daily, I think that's an important way that you do. So Jim, what about the DNR?
Well, in terms of keeping people informed with local politics, you'll excuse me, I'm technically on vacation this week, a staycation, if you will. So all my days have kind of molded together, but I believe it was last week where we printed, it was ahead of the first day of in-person early voting. The lead into that we printed like an information box, basically what's new this year in Virginia. Here's what you need to do to go vote. And then inside on the jump page, we actually listed not necessarily what, not a mock ballot, if you will, but at least what you can expect to see on your ballot, depending on where you were. It was just the candidates who were incumbents, whether Democrats or Republicans, which is an issue in the towns, but I think that's our job, is just to keep people the informed part. Now, I mean, the relationships with your readers and the people in the community are very important. I mean, there's a reason they need to trust you. There's a reason why we knew that there was a COVID-19 outbreak at Accordius that cost a lot of lives, because people knew that they can call us and we'd be trusted to, not get them in trouble. You know what I'm trying, they could, hey, there's something going on out here. You need to take care of this. A spotlight needs to be shined on this. And I think that's where that relationship, comes in. I mean, hey man, don't get me wrong. I'll complain with the best of them about some of the phone calls I get on a daily basis. But at the same point, I mean, I'm grateful for them. I mean, they get 2 cusses. They're allowed to swear at me twice. The second time I hang up on them. But, I love it, because it's stories. There was a story about a cemetery that I found that I got from a phone call. And so, I mean, those relationships are important.
Great. Isabella.
Sure. I mean, same thing. We get those callers all the time. Like Jim said, some of them you don't want to hear, some of them you do, but you're always listening. You're always hearing those stories. One of the things that we do, and Bob Corso, I'll bring his name up again, is normally the one that does this. He normally does these one-on-one interviews, and he kind of sits down with each candidate, literally every single one of them, just to get their views and to let our viewers know we're looking at everyone. We want you to know every single person so you can be informed. With the pandemic, that's been a little bit harder, but we are trying to get that working so that people know. This isn't, with our past local elections, we've done that a lot, and people have really enjoyed it. It's been one of our most viewed things when we look back at our website and we see people are constantly looking at that stuff. We also have had a lot of links on our web pages, kind of like Jim was saying, just talking a little bit about what people need to know when they head out to the polls. When I produce, I kind of normally always have that in my shows lately. It's been a lot of, here's a graphic of the top 3 things you need to know when you're heading out to the polls. When it was early voting, we did that too. I tried to incorporate everywhere around Virginia and around the world. I produce the 5 o'clock for the most part, so it does go a little bit national, but mostly local. So we try to do a lot of that, but just keeping them informed, giving them all the pieces of information so they know what they're doing.
And before we get to you, Bridget, it's just really interesting that so many of you are talking about having to adapt to this early voting. Usually you'd have that slated for, November, run the ballot at the end of October, and now you're having to adapt and get this information out there earlier. So Bridget, what about you? What about the relationships that you build in terms of the community?
Such a great question, because I'm going to talk about the JMU Center for Civic Engagement. We love partnering with them on voting guides and debates, and they're just a wonderful resource. And we've had this really great relationship with them. So we're really proud to be able to work with them on a lot of stuff involving local politics and local elections. I'm really proud of our election work. We started during the 2018 election, so we were sort of hit the ground running, and that was how we made our name. And so our election coverage the last few years has been pretty phenomenal, but we're really good at like very in-depth coverage. So we do profiles on, people who are running for offices and cultivating, those relationships with people. I will also say, like, the next day coverage of school board meetings and of city councils and of the meetings, not just while they're running for office and, running in elections, but the entire time they're in office, I feel is really important as well. And so it kind of, again, goes back to the objectivity of being a reporter. You build those relationships by being honest and by reporting the facts, and they might not like what you're saying, but in the end, you build that respect with people because of your objectivity. So I think that's really important in just building any relationship with any source.
Great, great. All right, so that is the end of the questions that we had prepared. So we're going to start with some questions from the folks out there listening. And I know that we're looking for the chat. We're going to get our first one here in a minute from Paul, who's got that lined up for us. And I'm waiting on that from Paul. While we're waiting on that, I guess he's typing Frank. Oh, there it is. Okay, so here's a question for you all, and I'll let whoever wants to start. How does your news organization take into consideration your audience when making decisions about what to cover and who to interview in stories? And it can be multiple audiences. So that question's in the chat so you all can see that. So see who wants to chime in on that.
Well, about who to talk to, it's who's important to the story, who is there, who saw what happened, who witnessed what happened. In terms of making decisions about what to cover, I think it's just more of, it goes back to knowing your audience and knowing, there's some things you have to cover, and I'm not going to go over those because they should be kind of obvious. I mean, there's some things you have to cover. There's some things you would like to cover, but you don't have the staff to get to. And then there's some things you're just like, I can't go out there and cover the world's largest zucchini anymore, like maybe this newspaper did in 1937. I just can't do that anymore. But I mean, it's but yeah, I mean that's what we take into that's how we look at it. I mean, and how important is it to you? Is it a great story? Am I telling you a great story? Am I introduce you to someone you don't know and you should know? Just things like that.
Okay. Anybody else? How do you decide what stories and who to talk to?
Yeah, I was going to say, like I said, I get to report once a week, and sometimes it is based solely on one person, and I know who I'm going to, and I know I'm going to be interviewing that person. But sometimes I'm going to an event. And what I like to do as a reporter, when I put my reporter hat on, is kind of sit back and look at everyone there and see who is engaging, see who thinks that, who's speaking out, see who's trying to talk to other people. Those are the people that really want to tell the story. I'm observing everything all the time. I'm taking it all in. And like Jim was saying about what stories we need to cover, we try to cover it all. Really, we do. We try to cover everything. There's not enough time to cover everything. I do an hour show. I can't do everything. I wish I could, but we try to cover it all. And, little sidetrack. If you want to send us a news tip, always send us news tips. That's always what we want. We always want all the news tips.
Bridget or Bob?
I could go. We have a meeting every other week where our contributors will bring us great ideas, and we'll just brainstorm and come up with great things. So that's one way that we try to come up with ideas. We try to do that covering again of like the school boards and the city councils, but then we'll go to other meetings and we'll cover other things, but not cover them as event coverage, but try to find the issue and then follow that up and interview other people and kind of to create a longer in-depth piece on why this is happening and how, and all of those questions instead of this happened today. And both of those things are equally awesome and important to have, I think. So that's one of the things that we do. Also take news tips. So just also throwing that out there.
Apparently everybody just needs to send all the news tips all the time.
Right.
I didn't know it was going to be that kind of party. I'm sorry. But let me piggyback off that, Bridget, if I can. And it's, you know, and this might be a little bit of my sports journalism bias showing, but I've always said that I always thought sports reporters were the best reporters in any newsroom, and here's why: because they sit there at a game that lasts 3.5 hours, and they need to find that those one or two moments where that game was won or lost, and then write the whole story around that. And that goes to what you said, Bridget, about going to these city council meetings or other meetings and finding that one thing that you just want to grab and write about. And I think that's why sports reporters always, in my opinion, I think are the best reporters in a building, because they know that.
Right. Bob, you talked about you can only do limited coverage. So how do you make those decisions based on knowing your audience?
Well, and when I say limited coverage, I mean we can't cover every event, but we do try to go in depth. And I guess the approach on this question I would take is we kind of come up with stories in two different ways. And we do take tips. So I get emails and we get phone calls. But again, this week with the series on the protests over the summer and some of the controversy surrounding that, we try to dive in a little bit deeper and do a different kind of coverage than what other local media might be doing, and talk to people involved in those events and talk to experts. And that's what happened with our coverage of the Black Lives Matter protests. Another approach that we take, because we are an NPR member station, we really have our fingers on the pulse of national and international news. And one thing I really like to do is do local feature stories that reflect something that we're all hearing about nationally. And so one series that we did last month was a 9-part series on mental health during the pandemic. And so, and Bridget participated in this and contributed a story, but we looked at children's mental health during the pandemic and a whole range of other issues about mental health in that 9-part series. So that was kind of taking something that's affecting people globally and in this country and talking to local people, local experts, local counselors, local physicians, and making it something that's more relevant to us here in our communities in the Valley and in Central Virginia.
Yeah, great. Following up on that, I've just put one in the chat. What's the issue of coverage you wish your organization could cover more in depth or cover more regularly? Is there something you're not able to do based on resources?
That's a great question. I guess I could go first.
Sure.
Yeah, we would, I think, and we've talked a little bit about this. There are lots of things that we would really like to be doing. For the Citizen, at least for the 3 publishers, this is a passion project for us, and we all have full-time jobs elsewhere as well as running the Citizen. So I would think more investigative journalism pieces is definitely something that we want to do, have wanted to do, and are hoping to get there very soon. So yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is. Thanks to whoever attendee who sent that one in. Anybody else? What would you like to cover more?
That's a heck of a question. I think really it's, not to be cheap here, but it's everything. I would like to cover everything more in depth. And I think part of that is my fault. Part of that is me wanting to be all local newspaper and having to depend on, okay, let's get as many bylines as we can, as opposed to, hey, hang on, let's do this deep dive into this. And we still try to do it. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. And when you're trying to produce and put out a daily newspaper, and then you see these bubbling cauldrons of information that you want to just dip your hands into, you know, it takes time and it takes elbow grease and it takes a lot of hours of a lot of people working together. But I think it's like, you know, it's like Bridget said, and it's like I think Bob and Isabella will say here, you know, it's something we're all striving to do. It's something we're all striving to do better as we all figure out this balance. You know, this balance between a daily product, this balance between a long-term in-depth projects. It's just, it's an unenviable time to be in our positions.
Yeah, it's really hard because you'll get an amazing story that'll come in, and then it'll be one of those super in-depth stories that you just want to get out in 2 seconds because you want everybody around the valley to read it. You want everybody to read it, and you know that you have to take that time. And I've really struggled with my patience, and I really just want to send it out. But as a reporter, as a journalist, you can't. You have to be patient. And I think a lot of our viewers do get confused with that. I think that they think that we're holding information back when really we just want to give you the best information possible. We don't want any information to go out that is false, that is not correct. And then we look like the idiots that sent you the wrong information. We want the best information to come out to you. So if we have to wait a day to make sure we get that information confirmed, that's what we have to do. And if that means that somebody else beats us, that means that somebody else beats us, but we just have to get that information confirmed. And that's one of the biggest things that I think we struggle with is viewers just questioning what we're doing. And, you know, really, we're really just doing the best for you. We're doing the best we can.
I would just say that I'm a political junkie. I wish we could cover politics more. We just don't have the resources to do a lot of local politics. At WMRA, we do have a statewide partnership with other public media in Virginia, with WVTF in Roanoke, with VPM in Richmond, and WHRO in Hampton Roads. And so we have a statewide network, and so I'm able to sort of piggyback on their coverage quite a bit. And sometimes, you know, our coverage areas overlap. So I'm able to get a story from a reporter for WVTF who is in Charlottesville, Sandy Hausman, who does some great work for them. And we get to use their stories, and some of the stories that we do, we send to them statewide. So, you know, that's the way public radio works in a lot of states, and we've built that kind of a relationships here in Virginia as well. But yeah, the short answer to that question is I wish we could do a lot more politics coverage, but we just don't have the resources.
Well, I want to segue to politics. So we got a couple of questions that I'm going to combine here. So kind of what's the biggest misconception about media in general and your media outlet specifically? And somebody specifically asked, do any of the political parties have any influence on your media outlet at all, or influence? So what are some of the misconceptions, particularly around politics right now?
I think for WHSV, it's hard because we are an ABC station, we are an NBC station, we are all of these stations, and people look at us and think that we are the ones that are reporting that, when we're really just taking that content sometimes. Kind of like Jim was saying with the AP, that's national, that's not us writing that. We are filtering that in. As a producer, I am constantly filtering through some of that content to make sure there's no bias there. And yes, it's very difficult sometimes because there is. So I think the biggest misconception is they look at us and think, oh, you're that ABC News station. Well, we are, but not really. We're more of that local station. So I think that's one of the hardest things for us.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, as we're an NPR member station, and of course NPR is seen by some people as leaning to the left and is criticized for that sometimes. I don't agree with that. I think NPR's coverage is very middle of the road. We have liberal listeners, we have conservative listeners. We don't really hear from local people. In fact, we have the fund drive going on this week, in which we hear from a lot of listeners when they become members or send in their money. And they say, we like this story, or we love your coverage. And a lot of it is so positive. And I'm seeing over and over again people saying, we appreciate the objective, unbiased coverage that you provide, over and over again. That's what people say about our coverage. And so, nationally, there is that criticism of NPR. But I will say I'm very proud of the job that NPR does and the national and international reporters. I think they are the best journalists in the business. And I'm so proud that we are a member station for NPR.
Great. Jim, you looked like you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I was, and I think I lost my train of thought. I think, no, seriously, I think that the biggest misconception is that I think people think that we're all we care about is the gloom and doom. I think, that's certainly not it. I mean, we no one likes to work. No one likes to see the sausages being made. I mean, but making the sausage is something that has to happen. I mean, and if there is something like this pandemic going on and there is, crime that needs to be covered, it needs to be covered. And the pandemic, it needs to be covered. And if people at local schools are testing positive for COVID-19, it needs to be covered. I think that's what I think people they like to think, I don't know, I'm not gonna put myself in what people think, but I mean, I think that's a misconception. It's not, hey, trust me, I would love to be out there and writing, wonderful pieces about people that, clean up the side of the road every Wednesday and do it for free and don't want thanks or anything. And I gotta convince them to talk to me about it because they want we don't want to be in the newspaper for this. So, I would love to just write about nothing but that, but I mean, it's keeping you informed, and you got to be informed of the good stuff and the bad stuff too, because you got to be prepared.
Do you think there's a perception of the DNR as particularly leaning one way or the other, like Bob talked about with WMRA?
I tried. These days I don't think so. I think it goes back to balance. I can't speak for the past, but I know it was like when I was sports editor there, and I know editorial decisions on the editorial page. What I get a lot of emails from people who say that while they still think it leans this way or the other way, they appreciate the fact that for the first time in their lifetimes, it's open to more opinions. And that's all I want to do. I'm not gonna, yeah, I mean, that's all I want. Hey, you're welcome here. You can write whatever you want on here. Just don't, with some exceptions, obviously. But I mean, we're not, it's not gonna, I mean, and it's, it's not easy. We print in a blue city surrounded by a red county. And keeping that balance is not easy. And so I just bring them all in, let me go from there. I like making fun of everybody with the political cartoons. and I try to tell people that some people you convince that, some you can't, but it's like, I like making fun of everybody. That humor gets us through all this.
Bridget, any misconceptions about the citizen?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know misconceptions. Maybe we haven't been around long enough for that, but facts are facts. And I think when you're doing your job correctly as a reporter, when everybody's upset with you at some point or another, you're doing a good job because that means that you're just reporting the objectivity and the facts, and people on the left are going to get upset, people on the right are going to get upset, and that's okay. It's fine. I'm not here to make them happy. That's not our job.
So another question that has come in, and I'm sorry, I'm still trying to type it. I'm not copying and pasting. What can local media do to combat misinformation on social media and improve media literacy in general? So how can your media outlet help with that?
Well, what I do, and I'm sorry for interrupting anybody, I was just quick on the draw this time. What I try to do and what I steer clear of is putting any sort of national news on our Facebook page. What I found out is when I put national news on the DNR Facebook page, it just turns into just a mess. And I try to avoid that. And so we just put local stuff on the Facebook page. And I think that's just my style. I think that helps for me because we don't have a social media manager. You're kind of looking at him. That's how it works. To combat the misinformation is just all, and that's how I combat it. You're just going to see local stuff from us on social media. We're not going to put anything the clickbait or to spark arguments. I mean, if you're going to argue about what's going on in Elkton, you're going to argue about what's going on in Elkton. I'm fine with that. Just don't be jerks to each other, please. Not on my Facebook page. And I think that goes hand in hand with improving that media literacy, is that, what is, okay, this is on DNR Facebook page. It's about something happening in Broadway or Bridgewater. So we know it's true. This isn't some made up stuff that someone's trying to get clicks off of. And I think, that's what I try to do. And I'm hoping to hear 3 different answers here. Cause I mean, that's just me. And it makes my life easier. And if by making my life easier, I believe improves, media literacy and combats the misinformation of social media, which I think it does, I'm winning, aren't I? I mean, it's winning for everybody.
I'll say for WHSV, we do post national news. And I will say when I go through those comments, I see a lot of people just reading the comments or just reading the headline. And I'd love for people to actually click on the article and read the full article. There is so much in that article that you're not unraveling except for in the comment section. The comment section is for you to express your opinion, but it's not where the facts are for the most part. The facts are in the article. So if people click on that and they can read that article and not just read the headline should never be misleading, but you're not going to get every single piece of information from that headline. Go into that article. That's where the reporters spent their day filling out, going and interviewing people to get the right facts. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I really want people to do, is just to start reading these articles. That's where that information is really going to come from.
Good point. Bridget, Bob.
Go ahead, Bridget.
I will say that so far, again, we're very young. So the discourse on our social media posts, it's civil. So we don't really have too many people arguing too much, and if they do, they're arguing in a civil way. So generally, that's great. This is such a great question that I don't have the answer to, and I wish I did. And so that's all I can say, is that I feel like news organizations just need to keep trucking with that. The pendulum swings, and we just need to maintain an objective, fair, fact-based organizations, because in the end that wins, and I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, I would just say I think the answer to that is we flood the zone with honest fact-based news. We can't control whether people are going to another site or whatever, but we can do what we do. And one thing we do is a daily podcast. We do something called the WMRA Daily, that is a roundup of local and statewide news every single weekday. And that's one of the most popular things on our website, and that people subscribe to through the smartphones. But a lot of what we post, going back to what Jim was talking about, local stuff, and what Isabel was saying, most of what we post on our social media is from NPR. Of course, we post our local news, but we do want to let people know what's interesting that NPR is covering, that they should pay attention to as well.
Great. We're going to wrap up with our final question. We've got about 5 minutes left. So our final question is, how can those in our community continue to ensure high quality journalism? What can community members do? And we'll start out with Isabella. I know you all want to say pay for it, but is there anything else you want to say?
Well, mine isn't necessarily pay for it, because you can kind of just get mine. So that's not really it. I do want people to pay for it, because I know all these local other organizations, they really need it. And that's where you're going to get that news. The other thing I want people to do is ask questions. Constantly ask questions. We get phone calls all the time. Sometimes they're not asking questions, but there are people that do ask questions. And I think that helps you. That kind of goes back to the media literacy, but it also helps us. When we know what you want to hear and what questions you're having, that brings that great high quality journalism.
Anybody else?
I would love to.
Bridget, go ahead.
Pay for it, please. Please do. But also, you know, we are in a global pandemic. So if you can't, and I totally understand that, and I do this with WMRA, and just as like a little shout out to WMRA, if you notice the advertisers on the pages that you read, thank them for advertising on local news. So if you can't contribute, if right now you don't have the means to do that, thank the advertisers for advertising with them, because they also love that feedback. They want to know that their ad is getting seen. That's a way that you could do for free. Become a cheerleader of the local news, right? Of the outlets. Share the articles and share the donate tabs. And even if you can't right now, but if you can, donate.
Bob.
Yeah, it's great that Bridget mentioned that a lot of people can't support whatever media outlet that they're relying on. But if possible, please do that. Subscribe to the local newspaper. And yeah, public radio is free. You can turn it on, but do help pay for it. It's less than 10% of our listeners who actually pay for public radio, so it's a pretty elite group. So pay for it, be engaged, and don't just listen to public radio, read the local newspaper, read national newspapers, find those reliable sources of information and rely on those and support them when you can.
Great. And Jim?
Pay for it. Pay for it. And know that whether you watch Isabella, you listen to Bob, and you read Bridget along with reading us, that's not too much. You should be reading. You should be doing more to keep yourself informed of local journalism. Whether we all going to admit it here or not, we're kind of all in this together. We're all in this together. Remember that everyone that works at these organizations are members of your community. Okay, we don't live in New York City writing about the Shenandoah Valley. No, I own a home in the Shenandoah Valley. Every reporter is living in the Shenandoah Valley. They're living amongst you, next door to you. Remember that. They're part of this community as well. Talk to them. That's all.
Excellent. Such great perspectives this evening. What a great panel. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank the library. Paul, is there anything you want to wrap up with?
Hold on. No, I just want to really just thank everybody again, all the panelists and all the attendees for some great questions. And again, for the panelists for some really good insight into each of their own news organizations. I mean, again, we kind of have addressed from all the different types of mediums. So it's been really nice to hear their perspective. And I just want to thank Lori. I mean, she's been a wonderful moderator and it's been great. So I think Lori has really tied this all together. So thank you again, Lori, for that. And again, we are going to have that post event survey, so I will email that out to each of the attendees. So if you please can fill that out, it would be really helpful for us. And then again, like I say, to help fill our obligation for our grant provider. So thanks again, everyone.
Great.
Have a wonderful night.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you guys for putting this on.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lori. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.